Former Assistant U.S. Attorney, Fox News contributor Andy McCarthy. Andy, based on what we know so far and what you've looked at about this brief from the president's attorneys, it looks like they are arguing that these two articles of impeachment don't amount to impeachment offenses. We heard Kellyanne Conway mention arguing the facts, which is something you think might be off base. What do you know based on reading this brief so far?
Well, I think that, as Chad points out, to the extent that they're saying that there is structural insufficiency in the two articles of impeachment, which I interpret to mean that they don't state the kind of egregious misconduct that the framers had in mind when they put impeachment in the Constitution. I think on that, the president is fighting on the ground where he ought to be fighting and on the place where it's most strong. The problem I think they have, Dagan, when they get into the facts is if they're going to make sweeping claims that, the president didn't do anything wrong, there was no quid pro quo. In the brief they filed over the weekend, they said, he even told Sondland that there's no quid pro quo. It was a very kind of crimped summary of what Sondland's testimony had been. That kind of invites inquiry into the facts and into whether there actually was a quid pro quo or whether he absolutely did nothing wrong. And that kind of helps the argument that we ought to be able to hear from witnesses who can weigh in and are knowledgeable about those two subjects. And I think that's the weak part of their case. And to me, it's the part they shouldn't want to get into, because the bottom line here is that these are not impeachable allegations.
Well, Andy, it's Kennedy. I have a question about this document, because obviously this is a political exercise. So how much of a brief like this would be political, and how much would it be legal? And who exactly is, who are the president's lawyers trying to reach with this?
Well, you're quite right, Kennedy. This is really more of a political process than a legal one. It's going to take place in the sort of legal framework that the Constitution lays out for impeachment trials. But at the end of the day, impeachment really has a political test more than a legal one. We can talk in an abstract legal way about what an article of impeachment or a high crime and misdemeanor is, according to Hamilton's articulation of it and what the experience was in the colonies before the Constitution was adopted. But the genius of the Constitution is they gave us an impeachment standard where, unless the public is so convinced that the president needs to be removed, that it exerts political pressure on 2/3 of the Senate to vote to remove him despite what their partisan affiliations are, then you really don't have impeachable misconduct, because there's no chance of removing the president.
So, Andy, Lisa Booth here, as you mentioned, abuse of power, obstruction of Congress are not criminal. Those aren't actual crimes that the House is alleging and charging the president of. So what's the long-term impact, though? So the House moved forward with impeachment. Now we're going to see this trial in the Senate. What's the long-term impact to the Constitution and to the country?
Yeah, I think we're probably not going to be able to make a judgment on that until we see how this trial plays out and what the public's take on it is and how the public reacts to it. What I'd be very worried about is what, frankly, the framers were worried about, which is that the reason for putting the 2/3 supermajority requirement in the Senate was that the framers were worried that impeachment could be used in a partisan way, or it could be triggered by frivolous grounds. So in order to try to push against that, the idea was, unless you had conduct that could move 2/3 of the Senate to remove the president, you don't have an impeachment case. And that's historically been enough to stop the House from going down this road in the first place. So the question becomes, are we now launched into this new era of partisan impeachment? And I think the only way we can answer that question is if we have this trial and it looks like it's very political and the public is really turned off by it, maybe that chastises people who would want to do this again, that this isn't such a hot idea. But I don't know if we can judge that now.
Andy, I will point out that support for impeachment is underwater still, based on the Real Clear Politics average, that more people are against impeachment and removal than for it. One last thing. Is it possible, based on what you've said, based on this brief that's filed by the president's attorneys, arguing the structural inefficiency of the two articles of impeachment, is it possible we see a case presented by the House impeachment managers where their brief even cited talking about the Lev Parnas information and also that government accountability report that was requested by Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen originally? So could you see them present that case, and then the president's attorneys don't even argue what was presented? They just essentially ignore whatever they say and then just say these two articles don't stand up to the test of impeachment?
Yeah, I think, Dagan, that's where they would like to be at the end. But the way I would look at this is, what are the Democrats really trying to accomplish here? Because I think once you grapple with that and you get a read on it, then everything else makes sense. They don't think they're going to have the president removed. They know there's not 20 Republican votes to do that, which is what they would need. So what are they trying to accomplish here? I think they've given two half-baked articles of impeachment to get in the door of an impeachment trial. And now what they're doing is continuing their investigation with the House leadership coordinating with Senate Democrats. And the idea is they're going to continue to throw new allegations, new witnesses, new documents into the mix in the hope of extending this, because the real objective here is not to remove the president, it's to bruise him up politically heading into the 2020 election. So the longer this goes on, the longer it gets extended, the longer it focuses on misconduct that, while it's not impeachable, does not make the president look good, the more it could hurt him politically going into the election. At least that's, I think, the theory that they're operating under.
Andy, great to see you. Thank you for jumping in the chair so quickly. Andy McCarthy joining us. Let me bring it out to the couch.